I feel I'll live better the rest of my life for having learned this. My mother is a recipient of some miracles of her own, both in the Shoah and recently, and she says that miracles in life are there all the time, you just have to not miss them. Finally, there is the very true cliché about illness. Illness forces you to take stock, to face your mortality and the choices you've made so far. It's sort of an emotional and ethical checkup. Illness enforces a kind of silence on one being, like a time to think. You slow down and you just have to, you think more. I evaluated my priorities, and there's a lot that's wonderful in my life, but there's room for improvement. Mostly I felt in interpersonal dealings. I questioned how I interact with people. Am I kind enough? Am I patient enough? Am I tolerant enough? Often no. Do I listen well? Do I do enough for other people? Do I pay attention to what's going on around me? And I have to say this part needed some tikkun and still does, and it's a work in progress. But I'm glad I've started it. And this brings us back to Tisha B'Av, which is a day for stock-taking if there ever was one. The Gemara says that mindless hatred, sinat chinam, brought about the destruction of Jerusalem. Gemara Gittin recounts the famous story of Kamsa bar Kamsa, which shows how rigorous yet heartless religious observance trumped human sensitivity and has spurred the events that led to the Khurban. Well before this time, Nevi'im prophesied about hollow superficial religious observance, and the source sheet that's too small for everyone to read. Maybe go home with a magnifying glass, but I wanted to just, there are many examples from many Nevi'im. It starts with Shmuel. And I just summarize, most of these sources show that people, like God's basically saying, I don't want your sacrifices, I want you to be just. That's a very important message. And in Micha, which is the bottom of one of the pages, he talks about the temple, and in the end he says, only do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And anyway, somehow during this time when we had the Beit HaMikdash, it's very hard to imagine, that's what we all hope for. How did we lose our way when we had the Beit HaMikdash? We lost our soul and we became mechanical. And I did a lot of learning this year, and I'll talk about a little exactly what in a second. But I think it begins with spiritual distance from God. And they say that the first Tisha B'Av happened on with the sin of the Meraglim. And that's actually on the source sheet. It's a little bit bigger. B'Midbar, chapters 13 and 14. And you all know the story of the spies, but it says all at the chapter 13 finishes and chapter 14 begins right away. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And the question is, what were they really crying about? It's hard. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of a lot of things that they were crying about, but I actually think it's that they were sad because they had had such closeness with God. And I mean, really, these spies, they didn't do anything so terrible. They scoped out the land and they came back, but they didn't sound like Caleb and Yeshua. They came back without God in their plan. But they didn't feel close anymore to God. And I think that is just a terrible loss, to lose closeness with something you had before. Second. Judaism is, before everything else, a moralistic religion. Hashem chose Avraham because he had in his home tzedek and mishpat as the first Jew. God demands that we act in an ethical way with one another. Once there is distance from God, it becomes very easy to ignore the Torah's ethical precepts, and we act badly. It's a very quick slide into that. And then we have religious observance that's devoid of meaning. And instead of arevim ze lazeh, we have the opposite, sinat chinam, where we go from being a holy nation to a petty, squabbling nation. And though there's a lot that's good in our nation now, we can see examples of this in our country now. And I think Tisha B'Av has to be a wake-up call to look at these things. Just as a healthy body is a gift, a miracle, so is our sovereignty in this amazing land after 2,000 years. And we can't take it for granted. We have to pay attention and diagnose our social ills and then work to heal them. Doesn't matter what our religious observance is or our political affiliation, but we can work on the disunity between us. We have to be more tolerant of each other, more patient, more forgiving, more accepting, and we have to be less polarized. We need to get to know fellow Jews who are different than us, and we can do this in concrete ways. I think if we all see Tisha B'Av as a call to action, a day to just decide, I'm going to be more active in causes that bring Jews together, then the message of healing our national body will be really a message that's heard. That was the parallel for me. It's our hope. I think that's the way out of more tragedies for Tisha B'Av.